Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of precision. Like it feels almost like engineering, right?
It's very structured, very binary.
Exactly. You break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line on the screen, and the doctor just points a pen at it and says, there it is. That is the problem.
Right. Broken or not broken, it's a localized structural failure. It's incredibly clean.
It's clean. But then, and this is where it gets wild, you step into the world of neurodevelopment or trauma or just human psychology in general, and suddenly that x-ray machine is, well, it's utterly useless.
Oh, absolutely useless.
Yeah. We are looking at a diagnostic landscape that is, honestly, it's murky. And that murky landscape is exactly what we are wading into today. We're taking a long, hard look at the hidden architecture of human flaws. More specifically, we are looking at something you, the listener, have definitely heard of, but almost certainly never thought about in quite this way.
Right.
We're talking about the 7 deadly sins.
Yeah, and we are approaching them through a very specific, profoundly different lens today. Because historically, we've all been taught to look at these sins as basically behavioral checklists.
Like moral scoldings, like don't do this or else you're a bad person.
Precisely, just wagging a finger at you. But our source material for this deep dive forces a complete paradigm shift. We are unpacking this fascinating, incredibly dense essay from 1971. It's simply titled The 7 Deadly Sins.
And it was written by Martin Lings, right?
Yes, Martin Lings, originally published in the journal Studies in Comparative Religion. And alongside that, we're also analyzing a really striking visual and textual excerpt from the ancient Buddhist text, the Dhammapada, which was included as this editorial addition to Lings' essay.
Which is such a cool pairing. So the mission of this deep dive is to decode these ancient concepts not as lists of bad habits, but as profound psychological and spiritual maps. The goal is to help you understand how your absolute worst tendencies, the things you might, hate most about yourself, might actually be your greatest spiritual potentials.
They're just pointed in the completely wrong direction.
Yes, pointing the wrong way. Lings takes the whole concept of sin and just entirely strips away the usual moralistic finger-wagging. He turns it into a study of physics, essentially, like spiritual physics.
Right, he treats the human soul as an engine, and sin is just a mechanical misdirection of power.
Okay, let's unpack this immediately with a mental image. I want you to picture a classic caricature of a miser. Imagine a guy in ragged, dirty clothes living in a freezing, cold, unheated room.
The classic Scrooge archetype.
Exactly. He's clutching this heavy canvas bag of gold coins to his chest. He's terrified someone is going to take it. He literally starves himself to save a single penny. Now, what if I told you that this miser is actually a saint whose compass is just broken?
It sounds totally contradictory at first.
It does. But what if the exact same energy driving that pathetic hoarding is the exact same energy that creates a spiritual master?
And that framing is really the genius of Lings' approach here. And it requires us to look at this totally impartially. Lings isn't preaching a sermon here. He is analyzing the geometry of the human soul.
Yeah.
He is looking at the mechanics of how the highest, most divine parts of our nature can just become inverted.
Right. And to understand that inversion, we actually have to start with the literal geometry and mathematics of it all. Because Lings begins with this history lesson that pivots straight into ancient numerology.
It's fascinating.
Before we even get to what the specific sins are, we have to talk about why there are exactly 7 of them. Or, depending on who you ask in antiquity, maybe 8.
Yeah, to figure that out, we have to trace this back to the early Egyptian desert fathers. Specifically, there's this historical figure named Bishop Serapion of Tunis.
Muis, right, and the Nile Delta.
Exactly, Nile Delta, middle of the 4th century. This period is super crucial because it contains one of the earliest recorded doctrines of what we call the peccata capitale, the capital or deadly sins.
But Serapion did something very strange when he wrote about them, right? Like he explicitly stated in writing that the number of the deadly sins was 8.
He did.
But when he actually listed them out for his followers, he only enumerated 7.
Yeah, and naturally this led to a lot of confusion. People were asking him to clarify. They were like, you said there were 8, but you only named 7. What is the 8th?
And his answer to that completely changes how we view human fallibility. He said the 8th isn't a specific action. It isn't, an urge or a bad thought. The 8th is the elementary condition of the soul when it is under the influence of sin.
Right.
It's the baseline state of being tracked.
Serapion used this really profound historical and geographical metaphor to explain this to his audience.
Yeah.
He basically said the eighth sin, that baseline condition of total captivity, is symbolized by the Israelites being held captive in Egypt.
Okay, let's sit with that metaphor for a second.
Mm.
Because being captive in Egypt means you aren't even on the battlefield yet.
They're just enslaved.
You are just enslaved. The environment of bondage is the entirety of your reality. You're born into it, you work in it, you die in it. That captivity itself is the eighth condition.
Exactly. Whereas the 7 specific enumerated sins, gluttony, pride, avarice, and so on, those correspond to the 7 nations of Canaan that the Israelites had to actively fight against in order to gain the Promised Land.
I love that. So the eighth is the prison, and the 7 are the warring nations blocking the road home.
It's a very active metaphor.
It immediately elevates this from a list of, bad behaviors to a literal spiritual war for freedom. But Lings pushes this even further. He dives straight into the esoteric mathematics of mortality and divinity. Like, why the number 7 and 8? Why does the universe seem to care about these specific integers?
Well, in traditional cosmology, numbers are not just quantities. They aren't just for counting. They are qualities. They have weight. Lings argues that at first glance, the number 8 actually seems much more fitting for the concept of deadly sin than the number 7 does.
Let's trace the esoteric logic of this, because it sounds strange to modern ears, but it has this undeniable internal consistency. According to the framework Lings uses, the number 5 signifies the human microcosm. Man is represented by 5.
Right. 5 acts as the universal signature of the human state. Think about it. We have the 5 senses through which we perceive the entire world.
Oh, true.
We have the 4 limbs plus the head. We were considered the quintessence, which literally means the 5th element, of the 4 classical elements of earth, air, fire, and water. 5 defines our terrestrial boundaries.
Okay, so 5 is us. Now bring in the number 8. Ling says 8 has a mortal effect upon the human number 5, and the way traditional numerology proves the relationship between 2 numbers is by multiplying them.
Yes, exactly.
When you subject the human state, 5, to the condition of 8, you multiply them. 5 times 8 equals 40.
And 40, across an incredible diversity of ancient traditions, is the universal number of death, of profound trial, of passing from one state to another through a kind of systematic destruction.
Let's look at how heavily that number is weighted in human history. Noah's flood reigned for 40 days. And that isn't just a random weather report. 40 days is the exact amount of time required to completely dissolve the old world.
Absolutely.
The Israelites wandered the desert for 40 years, an entire generation having to die off before the new one could enter the Promised Land. Christ fasted in the wilderness for 40 days, enduring the temptations.
And even the word quarantine derives directly from this concept.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the Italian 40 giorni, meaning 40 days, was the literal period ships were required to isolate during the Black Death. 40 is the mathematical duration of dying to the old state.
That is wild. I mean, what does it physically and spiritually feel like to undergo a 40-day destruction? It's a complete dismantling. So by multiplying 5 by 8, you arrive at the mathematical signature of mortality. But the esoteric connections between the number 8 and death get even more specific when Lings points to astrology.
They do. If you look at the 12 houses that make up the full circle of the heavens in traditional astrology, it is specifically the 8th house that signifies death and transformation.
And what is the 8th sign of the zodiac? It's Scorpio. And here is a detail from the text that is just wildly fascinating to me. Think about the visual hieroglyph for Scorpio.
Right, the M.
Yeah, it looks like a lowercase m with a barbed final stroke, a tail with a stinger. Lings points out that this symbol is doubly symbolic of death. Visually, it represents the scorpion's deadly sting. But linguistically, the letter M stands for mors, which is the Latin word for death.
It's all connected. You have the 8th sign, the 8th house, the multiplication to 40, all consistently pointing to 8 as the numerical vibration of mortality, of the soul's captivity and death.
Which perfectly maps onto Serapian's 8th sin. The captivity in Egypt, the death of the free soul. It makes perfect sense that the sins would be associated with the number 8. But, and here's the twist, they aren't. They are the 7 deadly sins, so why 7?
Because while 8 represents that mortal captivity, 7, like the number 1, is an essentially divine number.
Okay.
Ling says that between 1 and 7, like between Alpha and Omega, the entire drama of existence is enacted. And to understand why 7 is the number of divine perfection, we really have to walk through the numerical sequence of creation.
Let's do that. Let's trace Ling's cosmic countdown because it builds the foundation for everything else we're going to talk about today.
Sure.
We start with 1. 1 signifies the creator, the absolute source, undivided, and singular.
And from 1 we move to 2. 2 signifies the spirit. And Lings includes this really vital footnote here about how ancient linguistic systems reinforced these mathematical concepts.
Oh yeah, this part was amazing.
In the Islamic esoteric tradition, the spirit is the summit and synthesis of all creation, the point that opens directly onto the uncreated God.
And how does language actually reflect that?
Lings references a treatise on the symbolism of the alphabet by the Sheikh Alawi. He points out that the Arabic letter ba, which carries the numerical value of 2, is the specific esoteric symbol of the spirit. This isn't a coincidence in these traditions.
Yeah.
The language itself is viewed as a mathematical architecture.
I find that so compelling, the idea that speaking a letter is invoking a mathematical reality. Okay, so 1 is the creator, 2 is the spirit, 3 is heaven, 4 is the earth. And we constantly see 4 used for earthly things, right?
Yeah, everywhere. The 4 cardinal directions, the 4 winds, the 4 elements.
Right. Which brings us back to 5. We established earlier that 5 is man, but specifically 5 is man situated as a quintessence right at the exact center of those 4 earthly elements. 5 is man in the purely terrestrial state.
Now we arrive at 6, and this is where the geometry of the soul really starts to take shape. 6 is 5 plus 1. It is the human microcosm, 5, but with the addition of the transcendent divine faculty, 1.
Okay.
Lings describes 6 as primordial man, man before the fall, man created on the 6th day.
This is man fulfilling his ultimate cosmic function, which is the mediator between heaven and earth. This mediating role is represented outwardly by symbols like, the tree of life or Jacob's ladder reaching from the dirt into the clouds.
Exactly. And Lings drops another linguistic footnote here that I think is just brilliant.
Oh, the one about the word and.
Yes. We're talking about 6 as the ultimate mediator. Well, in Arabic, the letter wa, and in Hebrew, the letter vav, both have the numerical value of exactly 6.
Right.
And in both of those ancient sacred languages, those specific letters literally translate to the word and.
And, the ultimate linguistic mediator, the single word that takes 2 disparate things and binds them together, heaven and earth. 6 is the numerical bridge. It's just brilliant. If you think about how language shapes reality in traditional worldviews, the fact that the number 6 literally speaks the word and is profound.
It is a perfect synthesis of math and language. But Lings also offers another way to look at 6, geometrically. 6 is 4 plus 2, meaning the 4 directions of horizontal physical space penetrated by the spirit, which adds the vertical dimensions of height and depth.
Let's unpack this for you, the listener. Let's use a spatial analogy so we can really see this. I want you to imagine you are standing right in the middle of a perfectly square room.
Okay.
Look around you. You have 4 walls, north, south, east, west. That is the earth, the horizontal plane, the number 4.
Right.
Now, look straight up and look straight down. You have a ceiling above you representing height and a floor below you representing depth. That vertical dimension intersecting the horizontal represents the spirit. So 4 walls plus the ceiling and floor makes 6 directions. These 6 directions measure out the entirety of physical, measurable existence.
But, and this is the key, that model is missing one crucial element. The entire structure requires a focal point.
Right. Where do those 6 directions actually proceed from, and where do they return to? They proceed from the exact center. And who is standing at the center of the room? You are. The observer. The divine center.
Yes.
If you take those 6 directions of space and add the center itself, you get the final number. 7.
And that center changes the fundamental nature of reality. 7 signifies repose in the divine center. It is, as Lings puts it, the symbol of absolute finality. It is the Sabbath. In the Genesis narrative, God blessed the 7th day and sanctified it, because that in it, he had rested from all his work.
So 7 precludes the very existence of 8. It is a divine seal upon earthly things. The 7 days of the week, the 7 planets of traditional cosmology, the 7 sacraments, it's completion. It is a closed, perfect loop.
Exactly. So to finally answer the original question, if 8 is the number of death, why are there exactly 7 deadly sins? Because the sins are a direct mockery, a shadow cast by the divine septenary. They are the 7 nations of Canaan deliberately positioned to block access to the divine repose of the center.
They aren't just arbitrary rules. The sins are cosmic. They are a literal disruption of the very architecture of reality. And if we accept that the sins disrupt this divine architecture, we have to ask, where exactly does this disruption take place?
And this is where Lings introduces a fascinating paradox. We just spent all this time establishing the mortal danger of the number 8. But Lings argues there is a positive aspect to the number 8, And understanding this positive aspect is the only way to locate exactly where in the human mind these deadly sins take root.
It's time to map the architecture of the soul itself. And to do this, Lings borrows a concept from the French metaphysician René Guénon regarding the symbolism of sacred architecture. Specifically, he looks at the structure of the octagon.
Think about standing inside an ancient cathedral or a grand mosque or a classical temple. When you look at the structure, you very often see a specific geometric progression from the ground up to the roof. You start with a square base.
The square foundation. And as we just discussed with our room analogy, the square, the number 4, represents the terrestrial, the earth. It is grounded, solid, rooted in the physical world.
But at the very top of the building, reaching into the sky, you have a circular dome.
And the circle, the dome, represents heaven, the celestial sphere, the infinite, having no corners and no end. Lings notes that the celestial number here is 9, representing the overarching canopy of the cosmos.
So you have the square earth at the bottom and the circular heaven at the top. But architecturally, how do you actually connect a square to a circle?
Right, you can't just drop a perfectly round dome directly onto a square box. The corners will jut out, the whole structure will collapse. You need a transitional structure.
You need an octagon, an 8-sided structure that rests upon the square base and smoothly supports the circular dome above it.
The octagon is the bridge. And Ling says this architectural reality is actually the perfect map of the human microcosm. The octagon, the number 8, denotes the highest part of the intermediary region between our physical body and the divine spirit.
It is the absolute apex of our psychic substance. It acts as the vehicle, like the skylight, for the spiritual light coming down from the dome. Look at its geometric shape. An octagon is an 8-sided polygon. It's almost a circle, but not quite. It expresses an extreme nearness to heaven, a nearly spiritual nature, but it still has angles. It's still geometry.
Which means it is still on our side of the barrier. That is the crucial phrase Lings uses. It is on the soul's side of the barrier. And he adds another beautiful layer of symbolism here. 8 is the number of the winds.
Yes. The 8 winds signify the divine inspirations. These inspirations are meant to blow through this high octagonal chamber of our soul, animating our highest faculties.
Yeah.
We are meant to receive the wind of the spirit at this high altitude.
But because it is on the soul side of the barrier, because it is still part of human psychology and not fully the uncreated spirit, it's accessible, it is vulnerable. And this profound vulnerability leads us to the core philosophical principle of this entire essay, this Latin phrase that explains the true horror of sin.
Corruptio optimi pessima.
The best, when corrupted, becomes the worst.
It is a devastating law of spiritual physics. The higher a thing is, the more profound and destructive its fall. I mean, think about it. A corrupted rock is just sand. A corrupted animal is just a dangerous, rabid beast. But an angel corrupted, a corrupted angel becomes a demon. The power doesn't disappear, it just inverts.
Exactly. And Lings applies corruptio optimi pessima directly to human behavior. He wants to show us how our worst, most grotesque sins are actually our highest, most divine octagonal faculties turned completely upside down.
Let's bring back the miser we talked about in the introduction. The man freezing in his room, starving himself to guard a canvas bag of gold.
Right. If you look at that man purely from the outside, from a behavioral standpoint, it's just sad. It's grotesque and pathetic. But Lings demands that we look at the internal mechanism of what he is actually doing.
What is the psychology of hoarding? The traditional miser endures horrific conditions voluntarily. He freezes, he endures gnawing hunger, he alienates everyone he's ever loved, he denies himself every single worldly comfort or pleasure. Why? For a single unified object of devotion.
And Lings points out the absolute irony here. If a religious ascetic, a monk in a cell, did exactly those same things, if he starved, froze, and isolated himself for the love of God, we wouldn't call him pathetic. We would say he was enduring heroic deprivations. We would venerate him as a saint.
The miser is literally a living caricature of an ascetic. They possess the exact same spiritual muscle. They have the exact same capacity for total, unwavering self-denial and singular focus. The problem is not their capacity. The problem is their compass.
They are applying an absolute heroic devotion to a relative material object.
Right. This flips the entire concept of avarice on its head. It means that inside every true miser is a potential saint. The engine is massive. The steering wheel is just broken. If that avarice could be completely reorientated, if the gold were taken symbolically as spiritual treasure rather than literally, the miser would instantly become a spiritual master.
Wait, so the miser has the exact same engine as the saint. That is wild. And Lings extends this principle to other sins too, right? Examining how they are merely inverted virtues. consider anger. Is anger intrinsically a deadly sin?
Well, a feature common to almost all religions is the concept of holy anger. We see Christ making a whip of cords and physically driving the corrupt money changers out of the temple.
So the energy of anger itself isn't the problem. Anger is a profound, necessary energy for maintaining justice and truth. The deadly sin of anger is simply holy anger, corrupted and applied to the defense of the fragile ego.
Exactly. Lings does the same with jealousy. We generally think of jealousy as petty, insecure, and toxic. But look at the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments. It explicitly says, I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God.
Now, obviously, God is not envious in a petty way. He isn't jealous of a neighbor's crops. Lings explains that jealousy and envy share a linguistic and psychological root. The refusal to accept that another should be given something which one feels belongs rightfully to oneself.
Right. When God is described as jealous, it is a divine, absolute refusal to allow the human soul, which belongs entirely to the absolute creator, to be stolen by false idols or destructive illusions. It is a protective, righteous boundary.
But when a human feels the sin of jealousy, they are taking that divine absolute right of ownership and pasting it onto their own finite ego. They are acting like God over people and things that do not belong to them. They are claiming absolute dominion over a relative world.
But I think the most striking example Lings gives of corruptio optimi pessima is his analysis of the sin of pride.
Yes, this is where the linguistic analysis really pays off. Lings points out that in Islam, one of the 99 divine names of God is the proud al-Mutakabir.
Now, Lings anticipates a modern objection here. He says, someone might try to argue, well, there's good pride and bad pride. Like in French, there's fear, which means a noble, dignified pride, and then there's orgueil, which is arrogant, sinful pride. God is fear, we are orgueil.
But Lings completely shuts that escape route down. He says, no, we cannot plead a linguistic distinction here. In the text of the Quran, the exact same Arabic word used to describe the majestic pride of God is the exact same word used to describe the arrogant, deadly pride of Pharaoh.
It is the exact same word representing the exact same energy. So what is the difference? Why is one the summit of divinity and the other the deadliest of human sins?
Because divine pride is simply the recognition of reality. It is the recognition of the absolute value of the Supreme Self. God is proud because God is literally everything. It is a statement of objective truth. But human pride is an act of cosmic theft. It is a finite, created being stealing that absolute value and pasting it onto the tiny ego. It's a speck of dust claiming the rights of the absolute. Corruptio optimi pessima. The best, when corrupted, becomes the worst.
This deep architectural understanding of the soul raises a critical question. If the seeds of our worst sins are actually our highest divine qualities, what actually causes them to snap and point downward? How does an angel become a demon in real time? What is the actual mechanism of temptation?
Right. We've established what happens. Now we need to explore how it happens. And to explain the mechanism of temptation, Lings analyzes the foundational strategy of Satan.
The common cartoonish view of temptation is that the devil whispers to our basest, most animalistic instincts. We picture a little red demon on our shoulder saying, go ahead, eat the whole cake. Punch that guy in the face. Steal that money.
But Lings argues that Satan's primary target is not the basement of our soul. He targets the octagon. He targets our highest psychic elements. He targets our deep, intrinsic longing for the untransitory, for the eternal.
To illustrate this, Lings turns to the Quranic account of the fall of man. There is a very subtle textual detail he highlights here. In the Quran, Satan doesn't tempt Adam through Eve. He bypasses the intermediary and whispers to Adam directly.
And what exactly does he say to Adam? He doesn't offer him a piece of fruit just because it looks tasty or will satisfy a physical hunger. According to the verse Lings quotes, Satan says, "O Adam, shall I show thee the tree of immortality and a kingdom that fadeth not away?"
A kingdom that fadeth not away. He tempts Adam with immortality. He tempts him with the eternal. He appeals directly to Adam's highest octagonal faculty, the exact part of the soul designed to commune with the infinite.
The devil's ultimate trick is to take those highest faculties, our magnificent thirst for the infinite, our desperate need for immortality, and slowly drag them down into the outer sensory part of the soul. He reduces these massive divine longings and imprisons them in what Lings calls counterfeit objects.
He takes the engine built for deep space exploration and hooks it up to a golf cart.
Yes. That is a perfect way to put it. He tricks the soul into looking for infinite satisfaction in finite matter. And when you look at the specific deadly sins through this mechanism, they completely change shape. They aren't just moral failings, they are tragic miscalculations. Let's look at gluttony.
Conventionally, gluttony is defined simply as eating too much, a lack of willpower.
But Ling says gluttony is caused by an erring psychic element, a piece of the soul whose rightful place is at the threshold of heaven. Its normal, healthy function is to represent a sense of the infinite within us. But it has fallen. It has crashed into the sensory domain of the body.
Right.
So what happens? The soul is driven by a legitimate, massive hunger for the infinite God. But because the compass is broken, it tries to satisfy that infinite hunger by endlessly cramming finite matter food into its physical body.
It is searching for the infinite in the domain of the finite. Mathematically, it is an equation that can never be solved. It guarantees that the person will never, ever be satisfied.
It is deeply tragic. You aren't just hungry for bread. Your soul is hungry for eternity, but you only have bread to eat. The exact same tragic logic applies to lechery, or lust. Lings describes this as a psychic element meant to perceive divine love and divine beauty. It is meant to be entirely overwhelmed by the infinite beauty of the Creator.
But it falls into the physical, sexual domain.
Exactly. And when you take a thirst for infinite divine love and apply it to physical sex, you don't just get normal biological desire. You get insatiability. You get a monstrous exaggeration of human sexuality that destroys relationships and degrades the individual because literally no human partner can ever provide infinite divine love.
This logic of misdirected infinity also applies to what Lings categorizes as the static or contractive sins, sloth and avarice.
Let's break those down because sloth is usually just seen as being lazy, lying on the couch, not doing your chores.
Lings elevates sloth to a much darker place. He traces it to a perverted sense of eternity. Think about the nature of the absolute. God is eternal peace. Unmoving, perfectly still, lacking nothing. Sloth is a perverted attempt to realize that eternal peace in a domain, the physical world, which is divinely willed to be in a constant state of movement, work, and vicissitude.
The slothful person is trying to force divine stillness onto a world that is supposed to be working. They are trying to achieve the Sabbath rest without ever doing the 6 days of labor.
That's a great way to put it. And avarice, bringing back our miser, this is also a perverted sense of eternity. What is the miser actually doing? He's attempting to keep eternally that which is, by its very physical nature, ephemeral.
The miser is treating treasure upon earth as if it actually possessed the absolute, unchanging value of treasure in heaven. It is a category error of cosmic proportions.
Eternity and infinity are, as it were, the dimensions of the absolute, Lings writes. And it is the perverted sense of the absolute that lies at the root of all deadly sin. We are trying to force the absolute into the relative.
I want to pause here because this maps so perfectly onto our modern experience. Lings is writing this in 1971, but he is diagnosing the 2020s. Think about the pervasive modern feeling of insatiability. Think about the endless doom scrolling on our phones, the binge watching, the constant rabid consumerism, the need to buy the next thing, get the next, we feel so empty so much of the time, and the common narrative is that we feel empty because we are broken or shallow or damaged by technology.
But applying Ling's logic, that emptiness is actually proof of your spiritual depth.
Yes, it's a sign that a massive, infinite engine inside you is hooked up to a tiny, finite battery. You're trying to satisfy a literal thirst for the absolute with a 30-second video. You are trying to find immortality in an Instagram feed. Of course you're starving.
It makes complete sense.
As Lings puts it, it is only the reverberation of the absolute that can possibly account for the monstrousness of the semi-insane exaggerations in human behavior. We are trying to pour the entire ocean into a thimble, and we are going crazy trying to figure out why it's spilling everywhere.
And this realization that we are all walking around with these misdirected infinite engines, it forces a natural pivot in Lings's argument. If the mechanics of the human soul are this volatile, how does this actually play out at a societal level? This brings us to a sharp, uncompromising critique of modern secular society.
Lings takes a hard look at the modern world. He starts with a very practical observation. If the psychic substance of humanity is turned literally inside out, or upside down as he claims, why isn't the world entirely full of psychotic, deadly sinners? Why isn't every street a war zone of gluttons and misers?
It's a fair question. If our highest faculties are perverted into monstrous sins, why are so many people seemingly just normal?
Yeah.
Relatively benign.
Lings's answer is chilling. He says it's because most people's fallen elements haven't become monstrous. They have just become dormant. They are asleep. The soul isn't aggressively perverted. It's just atrophied. And this widespread spiritual dormancy creates what Lings calls the illusion of human progress. We look at modern society and think we are getting better, more civilized, because we aren't murdering each other in the streets as often or burning down rival villages. But really, our highest spiritual capacities, our thirst for the infinite, are simply in a coma. We are well behaved because we are spiritually asleep.
And this dormancy leads into Ling's massive pushback against a very specific modern idol, the idol of sincerity.
Oh, this is the part of the essay that really bites, and it challenges a core belief of modern culture. How often do you hear the phrase, well, I don't agree with them, but as long as they're sincere, that's all that matters? We treat sincerity as the ultimate virtue, like a get-out-of-jail-free card for any belief or behavior.
Right, but Lings argues that sincerity is all that matters is actually a profound truth. But it is a truth that modern man completely misunderstands. Because, he insists, sincerity cannot be assessed in a vacuum. It cannot be assessed without reference to what one is sincere about. The quality of the subjective reaction is inextricably dependent on the quality of the object.
You cannot be truly sincere about something trivial. Lings draws a hard line between sincerity and enthusiasm. Modern society, he writes, witnesses, without respite, the most violent orgies of enthusiasm. But the objects of these enthusiasms, whether it's a sports team, a celebrity, a new tech gadget, they are so ephemeral and worthless that the enthusiast is only using a tiny fraction of their soul.
They've momentarily detached from reason and memory to just scream and cheer. That isn't sincerity, that's just noise.
And Lings takes this further, into territory that is deeply provocative. He applies this logic of sincerity to the massive secular movements of his time.
He does. And it's fascinating because if you look at this strictly through Lings's 1971 philosophical lens, and to be clear, we're just mapping his logic here, not endorsing a specific political stance today, he makes the provocative claim that a purely secular dedication is philosophically incomplete.
Right, we're just analyzing the text here.
Exactly. He specifically uses the examples of the sincere humanist or the sincere communist. And he states that it is a contradiction in terms to call them truly sincere if we define sincerity as total dedication of the entire human being.
But wait, I have to push back heavily on Lings here. I've seen activists put their lives on the line for secular causes. I've seen people dedicate their entire waking lives, sacrifice their wealth, go to prison for humanism, for political reform, for environmental causes. You're telling me that is not total dedication? How can he possibly say they aren't sincere?
It is a really strong objection, but we have to follow Lings's architectural logic to understand his defense here. His argument rests on the difference between emotional frenzy and psychic totality.
Okay, lay it out for me.
According to his framework, secular systems, no matter how noble their earthly goals, are entirely horizontal. They deal with the earthly number 4. They deal with resource distribution, social equity, physical well-being. But they offer nothing whatsoever to the higher reaches of the human soul. They offer no immortality, no absolute, no transcendent spirit. They do not reach the dome.
Okay, I follow the architecture, but why does that negate their sincerity?
Because if an individual is gripped by a lifelong enthusiasm for a purely horizontal cause, Lings argues they are only using a fraction of their soul. The higher psychic elements, the octagon, the thirst for the infinite, must either be dormant or completely absent from that dedication, because the secular cause has absolutely no food for them.
Oh, I see.
If the highest part of you isn't involved in your pursuit, you aren't all there. You are fragmented. Therefore, you cannot be truly, totally sincere, because true sincerity requires the undivided totality of the whole human being.
Fervor is, in its highest sense, no less than the thirst for the absolute dangerously bottled up as part of an enthusiasm for some finite and ephemeral object.
That's the quote, yes.
He's saying you physically cannot fit the soul's infinite thirst entirely into a political box. The box will break, or the soul will fracture. These secular movements gain their formidable momentum by stealing the soul's latent spiritual fervor energy meant for God and applying it to politics. But the theft is always fragmentary.
Therefore, in Ling's view, the only way to achieve true sincerity, the indivisible totality of the human being, is through religious orthodoxy. And not just a surface-level cultural religion, but orthodoxy endowed with its full third dimension of mysticism. Only that vertical dimension is large enough, infinite enough, to engage every single element of our being, from the square base to the octagonal skylight.
Which is a terrifyingly high bar. I mean, if secular solutions are fragmentary dead ends, and if our souls are upside-down engines of infinite desire hooked to finite batteries, what is the path to actually fixing this? If we are all just misers hoarding canvas bags, how do we fix the compass?
This requires a transition from the diagnosis to the cure. And I must warn you, the cure outlined here is not a gentle therapy session. It is the brutal, terrifying process of spiritual alchemy and profound repentance.
Lings outlines a process that requires a complete conscious reversal of the fall. If the best parts of us fell down into the sensory domain and became perverted, we have to go down into the dark and get them back. The first phase of this spiritual alchemy is what the mystics call the descent into hell.
We see this motif echoed everywhere in classical literature. It is the deepest meaning of Dante's Inferno, having to walk through hell before you can ascend the mountain. It is the underlying psychological theme of Shakespeare's mature plays, like King Lear wandering in the storm.
Lings uses a great analogy from traditional fairy tales and folklore here. He likens this internal process to a journey into the depths of the earth in search of hidden treasure. The lost psychic elements, our corrupted divine capacities, are symbolized by precious stones. But they have been stolen and hidden in the dark by diabolically cunning dwarfs.
You have to go into the dark basement of your own subconscious to reclaim your stolen light. Now, at this point, a modern listener might say, oh, I know exactly what this is. This is just psychoanalysis. This is going to therapy, digging into the subconscious to find repressed trauma.
I thought the exact same thing. It sounds just like modern depth psychology. But Lings draws a massive, heavy line between the two. He contrasts this mystical descent sharply with modern psychoanalysis. In fact, he is quite dismissive of it.
Yes, he famously calls psychoanalysis the blind leading the blind.
And his reasoning goes back to the architecture again. He says psychoanalysis is simply one human soul working upon another human soul. It is entirely horizontal. There is no transcendent power involved. It's the earthly number 4 trying to fix another number 4.
Initiation into the spiritual path, however, is fundamentally different. It opens the door to contact with the perfecting and unifying power of the spirit. It brings in the vertical dimension, and it is the presence of this transcendent spirit that compels the scattered, broken pieces of the psychic substance to unify. It doesn't just analyze them, it demands that the soul become a single whole again.
But embarking on this path raises an incredibly important question, and it leads to what I think is the most chilling part of the essay. How safe is this mystical descent?
The answer is, it is not safe at all. It is incredibly dangerous.
Think about the mechanics of what you were doing. You were going into the dark basement of your soul to wake up psychic elements that possess infinite energy, but which have been living in a state of raging perversion for your entire life. You are waking up the glutton, the lecher, the miser. Ling says that when they wake up, they do not come quietly.
The text is explicitly terrifying here. It says these awakened elements come in anger, from dark and remote hiding places with the infernal powers still attached to them.
It is truer to say that hell rises than that the mystic descends. I literally got shivers reading that line. The soul becomes a literal battlefield. You are intentionally waking up your own demons in an attempt to cure them.
And this reality, the visceral danger of waking the sleeping dragons of the soul, is exactly why esoterism, the deep mystical paths of all religious traditions, has historically been kept more or less secret. It isn't out of elitism. It isn't to create a cool boys club. It is out of quarantine.
It's a hazard warning. It's putting a fence around a high-voltage transformer. Ling says it is incomparably better not to set out on the spiritual path at all than to follow it for a certain distance, wake up the demons, and then abandon the path.
If you start the process of spiritual alchemy, you wake up the highest, most powerful faculties of your soul from their dormant state. If you then break your pact, if you quit the path because it gets too hard, without redeeming those faculties, those fully awakened, infinitely hungry elements are left wandering around your psyche in their perverted state.
And what happens then? Lings drops the hammer. He says no man runs the risk of becoming a personification of one or more of the deadly sins so much as does an initiate who breaks his pact.
It's terrifying.
If you quit halfway, you don't just go back to being a normal, spiritually dormant citizen. You risk becoming a literal demon walking the earth. You risk becoming a pure personification of pride or gluttony or avarice because the infinite engine is running at max capacity, but the compass is still pointing to hell.
It is a profound warning about the reality of spiritual power. It is real electricity, and if you aren't properly grounded by orthodoxy and discipline, it will burn your house down.
So to survive this battlefield where hell rises, the soul desperately needs a weapon. It needs a strategy to win the war against its own infinitely powerful, perverted elements. And this brings us to the final fascinating paradox of Lings' essay and the stark reality check provided by the Dhammapada.
Right.
Okay, if Satan targeted the octagon and tempted the soul with the promise of a kingdom that fadeth not away, how does the spirit actually defeat the devil in this internal war?
This is the ultimate twist in Ling's entire thesis. The spirit defeats Satan by using the exact same weapon that Satan used.
The exact same message. Remember what Satan whispered to Adam? "O Adam, shall I show thee the tree of immortality and a kingdom that fadeth not away?"
The spirit, vehicled by the rites and practices of religion, addresses the soul's fallen elements with that identically worded promise. It whispers to the soul, "Shall I show thee the tree of immortality and a kingdom that fadeth not away?"
But there is one absolute universe-altering difference.
Okay.
When Satan said it, it was a lie. It was a trap. He was hooking the infinite desire to a finite object, an apple, goal, power. When the spirit says it, the message is actually true.
And a true message is infinitely more powerful than a false one. The highest faculties of the soul were made for nothing but the transcendent. When the spirit offers them true immortality, it is merely asking them to conform to their own true nature. It is calling them home.
But this isn't magic. It doesn't happen overnight. You don't just hear the promise once and get cured. Lings talks about the method of delivery. The power of divine persuasion relies on the implacable rhythmic regularity of the performance of rites, the daily prayers, the chants, the meditations, the fasts.
The promise of the transcendent is, in Ling's words, drummed ceaselessly into the soul, day after day, year after year. And because it is true, and because it perfectly matches the soul's deepest geometry, this rhythmic promise is bound to prove, sooner or later, completely irresistible to the psychic elements.
It slowly retunes the engine. But to make that promise irresistible, you have to break the soul's addiction to the false promise. You have to break the deep-seated illusion that the finite world can ever actually satisfy us. And that is exactly why the editors of this journal included a very specific excerpt at the end of Ling's essay. They appended a passage from the Dhammapada, the ancient collection of sayings of the Buddha.
And the tone of this Dhammapada excerpt is a sharp, jarring contrast to the elegant mathematical and geometric language Lings was using. It is visceral. It is physically shocking.
It demands that we look at the physical body, and this is so relevant today. Think about our modern obsession with youth, wellness, anti-aging, gym culture, Botox. We treat the physical body as the ultimate temple, the ultimate reality.
We do.
But I want to read the exact imagery the Dhammapada uses. It says to look at this body as a painted image, wounded and swollen, sickly and full of lust, in which there is no permanence. It calls this physical form a wasted form, a nest of disease and very frail. It is full of putrid matter and perishes.
The text forces the reader to confront the unavoidable, ugly reality of death and decay. What delight is there for him who sees these gray bones scattered like gourds in autumn?
And the final line, "Here is a citadel of bones plastered with flesh and blood and manned by old age and death, self-will and enmity."
It is incredibly gruesome.
It's almost shocking after the elevated philosophy we just spent an hour going through. But we have to ask, why include this morbid image right after an essay on the mechanics of the deadly sins?
Because it acts as the ultimate antidote to the devil's lie. It shatters the counterfeit object.
Exactly. If our sins are caused by seeking immortality in the physical world, if gluttony is seeking the infinite in food, if lechery is seeking the infinite in flesh, if avarice is the miser seeking the eternal in a bag of gold, the Dhammapada holds up a brutal mirror and says, look at what you are worshiping.
It proves mathematically and biologically that the physical world cannot hold the infinite. It is just a citadel of bones. It will rot. It will perish. It is plastered with flesh and manned by death.
It is the ultimate reality check. Imagine our miser clutching his bag of gold, completely obsessed with it, and suddenly he realizes that his own hands clutching the bag are just gray bones. He realizes the gold will outlast his flesh, but eventually even the gold will be swallowed by the earth.
By destroying the illusion that the finite world can ever satisfy us, it forces the soul to take its massive, infinite hunger and redirect it. It leaves the soul with no other choice but to look up, to look toward the Dhamma, toward the spirit, toward the truly infinite.
It perfectly closes the circle of Lings' argument. We start captive in Egypt, dying in the number 8, worshipping a citadel of bones. But through the agonizing descent into our own hell, the shattering of worldly illusions, and the drumming rhythm of the true promise, we can defeat the 7 nations and return to the divine repose of the center.
It is a staggering, transformative map of human consciousness.
It really is. Okay, let's briefly recap this incredible journey we've been on. We started with the ancient numerology of 7 and 8, the mathematical signature of mortality, and the geometry of creation.
We explored the architectural octagon of the soul and the devastating principle of corruptio optimi pessima, how our highest divine potentials become our worst, deadliest sins when inverted.
We looked at the devil's specific strategy of misdirecting our thirst for the infinite into finite objects, creating the monstrous exaggerations of behavior we call sin. We examined the dangers of modern fragmentary enthusiasms, the idol of sincerity, and the illusion of progress.
And finally, we faced the terrifying but necessary spiritual alchemy required to put the soul back in order, waking our dormant demons to redeem them through the persistent rhythmic promise of true immortality.
It is a text that completely rewires how you view yourself and the world. And as we wrap up, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final lingering thought to explore on your own.
I love that.
We started this deep dive talking about a broken X-ray machine and a broken compass. We spent this time discussing how our deepest flaws, our ugliest sins, are actually just our highest spiritual hungers pointed in the wrong direction.
Right.
So I want you to look at your own life, look at your own mind. What is your most persistent, stubborn flaw? What is that bad habit, that addiction, or that dark tendency that you just can't seem to shake? The one you are most ashamed of?
That's a hard question.
It is. But if you apply Martin Lings's map to your own soul, and you view that flaw not as a disgusting weakness, but as a broken compass, what is that flaw actually telling you? What is the infinite divine thing that your soul is actually starving for right beneath the surface of that sin? Thank you to our expert for guiding us through these incredibly deep waters today.
Oh, it was an absolute privilege to unpack this with you.
And thank you, as always, for joining us on this deep dive into the hidden depths of human nature. We will see you next time.